Hello, welcome to Art 102, Week 7. It is August 7th, 2023. I will share screen now. All right, so today we're actually doing two lectures in one. I usually do one lecture in one, of course, but um, until it stops being relevant, I've added a section in AI art for either week 8 or week 9. I can't remember. I think week 9. So I squished two lectures into one for today. All right. So uh, I should say the first topic we're talking about is the meta of art history and understanding art, about this course a little bit more. So first of all, we're going to talk about myself. Do you trust me? So my qualifications to teach this class is I was hired to teach it. This is my sixth time teaching it, and I haven't been fired. And I have a master's in fine arts, which is what's required in order to teach this class. This is a sample of my artwork. So you know that I'm an artist. I purposely use something that's kind of silly and quote unquote low skill just for humor's sake. So this is how I choose the art that I show. So I'm most of it comes from Twitter, from people on accounts I follow. So basically that's where I spend most of my time gathering art. Um, I'm I am definitely more of a person who goes I use Twitter mainly to look at cool new video games, but I also started adding art to that mix, and just checking out cool upcoming video games, mostly indie games, smaller indie games, art games, for example. And then art, those are the big things. I also, follow other interests like skateboarding, pro wrestling, music. But the majority of it is mostly art, is what I'm looking at, art and video games. Um, I don't do arguments on Twitter. I avoid all that. So um, I spend probably like an hour to 2 hours on Twitter every day or so, to not specifically just for this class, but because I also like looking at art a lot. So a lot of it comes from that. So of course that means um I'm not that's I'm kind of limited to what's put on Twitter, because some artists don't have any of their work on Twitter. Some of it only exists in art textbooks. Sometimes it's only on Mastodon or DeviantArt, right? So there's a lot that I'm missing there. But Twitter is huge, and yes, a shit show, but also it has a lot of great stuff on there too. And that's how I survive using Twitter, by avoiding everything that is stupid and trying to make everyone react in a certain way. So that's a huge thing. So I do try to show more women and people of color than what has been shown to me in art history courses. A lot of the people I do follow are have furry avatars, usually queer, don't know their race or gender identity necessarily. So um, I don't always know. So who knows? It could be one of those things, could not be sometimes, I don't know. But I do follow accounts, women artists and artists of color, which is where I found this painting, the artists of color. So I'm also more interested in spite of this slide image, I'm also interested mostly in contemporary stuff, things that are happening now, rather than more important historical things that have happened in the past. I'm always looking for new, fresh, interesting, novel stuff. Basically, that's kind of how I operate. With everything, music, movies, I'd rather watch something new and interesting, rather than watching the same thing over and over again. So that's another aspect, is you probably get less rococo or romantic paintings than maybe other instructors who might be more interested in that. Yeah, I'm interested in small, weird experimental things. Yeah, I like underdogs basically is what it comes down to. Things that are less well known that I feel probably should get more attention. I tend to strive towards those. But of course, there's like I saw Dark Side of the Moon by a cover band being played on Sunday. I cried 5 times. I'm not going to deny the power of one of the best selling albums of all time, right? Um, but then that was 2 nights ago. Last night I saw my therapist band play. They're very unknown. They're called the Unbranded. Um, it was a shot going from this big amphitheater to a small bar. So I tend towards variety, but I will say that I've been to the small bar like probably 10 times this year and that big amphitheater only once in my lifetime. So kind of shows you how skewed I am. I'm not good with metaphor symbolism stuff beyond the surface. So yeah, um a lot of, let's say, like 17th Dutch still life paintings I don't really show much of, um, because there's a lot of symbolism behind that and I have a hard time picking that apart. I forget things easily. I'm not good at reading into things. I'm kind of into reading surface things and enjoying them because they look cool. Or maybe I like the person behind them, but if it doesn't look good, then I probably don't care. So um, that's kind of how that's kind of I think that's important to talk about because again, like you're only seeing a tiny amount of what could be shown in this sort of class. And like 99% of the images in what I've shown this entire term come from my choosing. So other comes from um, a textbook or other professors I've collaborated with. Subject position. This is a very important thing. So this is the exact person I am, created by things such as identity and background. To further extrapolate, it means, I mean, everyone's unique, right? Like in the fact that even if you have an identical twin, you're not in the same body as them. You might experience things slightly differently, right? So that might affect how, and like identical twins like don't always have the same exact interests. I've seen shows where one is straight, one is gay, for example. So there's always a difference between people, right? And that's always going to be very influential on how you see things. So for myself, being cis male, I've never really thought too much about trans representation or trans bodies, intersex bodies, non-binary bodies. It's never really occurred to me until recently. I'm gay and queer, so I do miss, like, well, like, why are these um gay photographs villainized, right? Like, shame from that. So I tend to enjoy that stuff more now because I don't have that shame attached to it. I'm able to work through that. I'm Mexican American, so things that are have to do with like being Mexican American or just Mexican in general, because obviously have roots in Mexico. Um, that stuff can interest me more than say a Swedish painter, right? Because I have nothing in common with them. It's like Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, big within my family and my culture, for example. Um, I'm feminist. I believe women should be treated as humans. I don't know why that's controversial, but yeah, and I think they should be equal. Again, that's kind of silly to debate, in my opinion. Anyways, politically independent. Again, I don't subscribe to a specific party. Um, I'm a vote or issue by issue type voter. I'm a furry. I love furry art. I appreciate furry art. So so those things are important, right? Like I explained a little bit about why those particular things influence how I look at art, what I value in art, what I see in art, or maybe what I might not like, right? But I also have the background, like my mom worked at a community college as the art department secretary, so I was around artists growing up all the time. I'm sure that had a huge influence on me. So so thinking about that, like think about how your parents influence you by like what they taught you, if they took you to art museums and such. Um, et cetera, et cetera. That's actually 2 slides from now. So yeah, there's a couple other fun facts about me that might have influenced how I see the world, how I I interpret stuff. So yeah, the point is like the way you learn about art has a bias. It's never a blank slate. There is no such thing as complete objectivity about art. It's kind of obvious. And the way we learn about US art history in the US, I'm going to talk about these specific things. So English speaking, that's kind of obvious. English speaking means people who speak English, right? And that does include British English, Australian English, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, most of the we tend towards English speaking artists because we speak English. Yeah, that's teleological, but basically by that it means like they're easier to understand in that sense. We can connect with them easier. If they're alive, we can ask them questions without having to translate or whatever. So within an English speaking world, of course, we're going to go with something more familiar. So yeah, art history does, which is largely Western European. Um, there's a bias towards this. Another thing about other languages that we might be biased against is because, well, we don't understand the language. Yeah, there's uh, tools to translate and such, and things being more accessible with AI translation. Um, However, that is a barrier. Sometimes you know, you're scrolling through something and you see something in a different language and you're like, I just don't feel like selecting, copying, pasting into Google Translate and reading, you know, there's extra barriers to that. Along with that, not only is it just a matter of Google Translate, sometimes there's things within the language that don't translate to English well because there's nuances, histories, intonations within that language that get lost when it's translated into English. So there's no such thing as a perfect translation. There's only sort of how accurate can you get, because a word for word translation just might not work. So sometimes it does, but many times there's a lot lost in that. It's also the problem that, you know, anything that's not English, they're stupider. They're not as good as us. Whatever. That's always a problem. It's really stupid, but of course it happens, right? Because if someone's trying to speak English and they're having a hard time, they sound stupid, right? I mean, of course that applies vice versa. So, but some people just stop at the fact that yeah, they don't they don't get our language, so they're not as good. So obviously, don't be like that. White. So this is meant to be implied to be European. It's not necessary. It is tied to skin color, obviously, but that's not always true. Um, I mean, Arabic people or Middle Eastern people are considered to have white race, even though they appear brown. It's weird, complicated depending on how you define it. I'm talking about in definitions of US census. That's how Middle Eastern people are defined. I'm a brown person, my race is white, go figure. Um, and when we're talking about white here, we're talking about European. Um, I would argue a lot more like Western European as well, like UK, France, Spain, and Italy, and other things too, of course. Countries. So, so yeah, within the art history I've learned, I've taken many classes. A lot of the artists are generally white, overwhelmingly so. Again, this is because these are people picking who's important in art history. And yeah, maybe there is more white people because generally there are more white people in the that these people are writing about. Like there's more white people around them, right? Sure, by numbers, but that doesn't also include the fact that, maybe there would be more black painters in Europe if, they weren't subjugated to lower classes and um, sort of made as inferior people. Yeah, of course there's lower numbers, but how many would become successful if if they were given the ability to actually engage with these systems, right? So racism, of course, is a part of that. And yeah, I do want to point out there's nuances and exceptions, but we're talking about the majority of things. Like most things in this class, there's very little cut and dry answers to this. But yeah, pretty much most artists you'll see in art history textbooks are white. Um, and also, like, even in this slideshow, probably mostly white. Like this was, I don't know who made this. It's part of video game screenshot. I didn't get the full credits of that, but if you click the link through, you might get some more background on it. Upper middle class. Okay, this is also very, very important. I would say arguably one of the most important aspects. So the reason we see more upper middle class people is because, well, art is kind of geared towards those type of people. So art does cost a lot of money. It costs a lot to make materials, um, but more importantly, it costs a lot to buy them, to buy these pieces. A lot of my friends who make art, they wouldn't be able to purchase their own artwork, um, which is kind of messed up. So another thing about art is it does take there's simple art such as this, right? Not knocking it, of course. I obviously love this piece. It's beautiful. But some art does take a little bit more knowledge and background to understand and appreciate to its fullest potential, right? And not everyone has the resources to learn art history to go do that. Of course, I've learned that. I had the privilege. I had a single mother growing up, but I also got because of that, um I did FAFSA and got some BOGG grants, which means I didn't have to pay for like most of my college career. Um, I didn't have to pay for, right? And the little I did, my mom was able to help out. But not everyone has that sort of opportunity. Um, some of that is like the fact, well, my mom worked at a college and she does like know how to navigate these systems, which help me. Some people like, even though everyone has access to these systems, you might not have the knowledge to do that because your mom didn't work at a college, right? Um, so yeah, basically, like the idea of being in debt for the rest of your life doesn't appeal to some people, especially for art, which is not as stable as STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, um, which aren't guaranteed but have more stability. Um, Pretty much art degrees are relegated to teaching, which is what I wanted to do. I just happen to be the best at art, basically. Um, I actually wanted to be a biology teacher, but I couldn't do calculus, so I had to switch to art because, like, well, I might not have as many opportunities in art as biology, but I can do it, So I was fortunate in that sense. Having time to make art is a privilege. I've been very busy doing a lot of different things. Pride in Eugene's coming up. I've been busy dealing with that kind of stuff. So I haven't had time to actually make art because I'm just so tired. And when I'm tired, I'm not creative, And so if you're working hard to support yourself, you're going to have less time to make art, and which kind of sucks, right? Especially since art classes and humanities classes are being gutted more and more. Um, they're seeing as superfluous and not essential. Um, they are essential, definitely. That's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, it's a lot of privilege to be making art in 2023, that's for sure. Especially with gig economies and inflation. Things are messed up. So you have to spend extra time making stuff or working in order to just keep up. Also, bigger cities have more institutions, but bigger cities um, cost more money to live in. So, yep. Straight people are favored over LGBTQIA, of course, because, well, first of all, numbers, but of course, LGBTQIA plus were thought of as weirder and don't fit in normal society. There's probably also the fact that we're called queer, and that's outside of the normative. And anything that's outside of the normative is a potential destruction to the status quo or whatever. Even like the most normalized straight white cis gays, like they can be seen as a threat even though they've acclimated to heteronormative society, right? Things like that can happen. So but I'd say a good number of us LGBTQIA people aren't thought of as the same as heterosexual people. That's kind of how it is, probably how it will be for a while, but fortunately it's getting better, um, which is fantastic to see because everyone deserves love. Men are favored, of course, over women and non-binary people included, but we're going to focus on women right now specifically because um, there's more history in women versus men than men versus all other genders. So here's a statistic brought up by Gorilla Girls, who were a female collective, anonymous people, anonymous females. They're anonymous because they knew they would get shunned by the art world if they revealed their identities. But yeah, basically they say less than 5% of artists in the modern art sections are women, but 80%, 85% of the nudes are female, which tells you how women are treated within art history. There's courses on women in art history. But yeah, this is also a chart on the update from 1985 to 2015, how things have improved for women, marginally so. Yeah, this is almost a decade old, but um, think about the leap from 85 to 2015. That's 30 years. Yeah, 30 years. And look how insignificant the number has been. Um, I don't know how many one-person exhibitions there are. I would guess at least 10, probably 12 or so, one per month. There's many exhibitions. Oh, NYC museums, plural. Okay, so there's like, I didn't even see that part. Okay, yeah, they are doing for specific museums. All right, I'm getting confused. I had bad sleep. Anyways, but yeah, this shows how insignificant women artists are being treated and represented in galleries compared to men. This can't play, but that's fine. This is a really great section of how this ways of seeing things by John Berger or Berger, I'm not sure, about women, and this was made in the 70s, and it's a very, very good view about how women are seen in art history, and he talks to women about it, and he's quiet for the most part, which more men need to do when it comes to listening to women, especially when it comes to their bodies, which is very relevant to this anyways. So, yes. All right, so teaching and learning is imperfect. So there's bias here. Just learning, you as a student learning from me is, even if you're the perfect student, if I was a perfect teacher, which is not possible in both senses, It's imperfect. So this is the communication process. I studied human communication as a minor. This is a quiz question. I studied human communication as a minor. Um, and I'll tell you that it's definitely a lot more nuanced than this, but this is a oversimplified model that gets the point across. All right, so this is me. I'm encoding this lecture right now. So encoding is me taking what I know and creating this message, which is this lecture. Okay, my knowledge on this lecture. Again, this is influenced by my subject position, how I interpret things, and how things make sense in my brain. And of course, this applies to different people in different ways. So my communication medium is right now the slideshow, or well, no one's here for the live stream again. So this YouTube video you're watching or not, well, yeah, if you're listening to this, you're watching, obviously. So thank you. So that's a communication medium, this YouTube video that you're watching, I don't know, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Wednesday, maybe. So I'm translating these thoughts that I have, these interpretations of my years of studying art, of looking at new art, watching more videos about art and figuring things out. And this is the result of that. I'm putting it into the slideshow so I can teach you these things in a way that's acceptable to Lynn Benton Community College and any accredited college that participates in the system of accreditation, right? So this is how I'm doing it. There's other teachers who have similar, very, very similar slideshows, things moved in and out depending on their personality and what they like. But yeah, this is my slideshow. However, there's this thing called noise. So this interferes with quote unquote perfect delivery, which again never exists. So this noise is just things that distract from quote unquote perfect delivery. So if your dog's barking while you're watching this video, that's noise that distracts from the message being sent to you. If you spilled your cup of Coke on your keyboard and you miss like 3 minutes of lecture, that's noise, of course. Noise can come from me. I know I say more than I'd like to and more than you'd like to. That can be a little bit distracting. So there's all sorts of things that go into this. Mostly I would say you could be existential and argue that anything is noise, but I would argue that only things that happen during this lecture while you're watching it is really noise. Things that happened yesterday, for example, I wouldn't consider noise. I mean, the only way I could see that happening is like you got the stomach flu and you're sick and you're watching this and your head's cloudy, like stuff like that. I wouldn't consider like, sure, maybe, but mostly I'm talking about things that are happening during my communication to you. Okay. And so decoding is on your end. This is how you interpret these statements. So the ultimate communication would be directly from my brain directly to yours without and you understand perfectly. But again, I have to encode this with pictures, slides, text and stuff, which is distracted by noise. And so you have to get that message in a bottle, basically, with all this noise kind of making it all weird, and come to the conclusion of what I must mean by this one thing. So there's a lot of misinterpretation that can happen. I would say that's not really a big deal because especially when watching it through here, because you can rewind as much as you want, right? So yeah, again, there's a lot more nuance and detail to this, but this is generally how the communication process works. And of course, we're going to talk about you as a student. So apply the things about subject position that I talked about for myself to you. So again, think about how my mom worked in the art department. Not everyone had that privilege if they're interested in art, right? Maybe their parents loved art. Maybe your parents never had anything to do with art, or they hate art for whatever reason. I can't imagine anyone hating all art. But think about how that affected you, what you saw, what you grew up with, what was acceptable, what was not, what was around your neighborhood. I grew up in a more metropolitan area where there's art everywhere, so that gave me a bias. If you're in a smaller city, you might not have that many museums or galleries or any at all, right? If you have a gallery right next to, like, on the same block that you live in, that might affect how you see art, because you get to see this gallery all the time, especially if you just dip in randomly, see what's going on, and oh, I didn't expect this is pretty cool, you know. Do you search out art, or do you just let it come to you? That's also a difference. um, and think about, after this class is done, think about how your perception of art changes. And another very important concept that occurs on your end is, what do you want from art? Again, this is the most important thing to learn from this class. So you'll only get out of art what you put into it. So to sort of go over this again, really think about why you like art. What do you want to see? What kind of effort do you want to put in? Again, I talked a lot about how I like things on the surface, and I'm not super into symbolism, how I'm more interested in contemporary things than older historical things, etc. So think about that and apply that for yourself. Pretty things, like the thing to the right is pretty. What does it mean? Is it, I mean, I think it's just an exercise in design and seeing how colors and these circles interact in regards to space as well. Think about all the terms. If you're looking for deep historical meaning, it was done in 1937. You definitely can find some, but if you're not willing to look at what was going on at that time, you might say, oh, this is just circles. Who cares? You know? So again, think about how deep you want to dig. And what you want art to do for you. But also remember that it doesn't just have to be one thing. Sometimes learning about an artwork makes me happy. Sometimes finding out the symbolism behind things makes me really happy or depressed. I've had artwork make me cry after I read about what they were. So again, think about your position in this world and what you're, not just from art, but what do you want from life? That also bleeds into art as well, right? Like some people just, like, you just want to enjoy yourself and try to coast through life as much as you can, because maybe life is hard is already. That's fine. If you want to work to be a art collector, that means you have to work really hard. So you want, like, to know everything, you want to just be successful. That can affect how you see art too. um I personally just want to enjoy stuff as much as possible, just feel things and um really put myself into it without necessarily needing anyone else's input on what this means. Like, that's how I kind of approach a lot of things, not everything. um it's served me well, so yeah, think a lot about that. Here's an article. I have a heart next to it because it's quote unquote required reading. There's a quiz question that is associated with this article here, but it's a woman of color in London, which is why I left the U in here. um it's really great. She talks about why art history kind of sucks in some senses, why it kind of rules, and some problems associated with it. So the too long didn't read about this is, art history has its own language and it tends to keep outsiders away from it. You have to learn the language, you have to learn the lingo, that's exclusionary, and it privileges people who can learn those things. And again, if you don't have the time to learn those things, then you're excluded from this conversation. So yeah, and they talked about how women are oppressed and people of color are oppressed. But it's also good acknowledging that and moving forward and doing more representation, which is what these people from the white people are doing. They're women. I know one of them is a woman of color. I think the other one might be white. But they're really starting to make some waves within the art world. And instead of just complaining, they're it's not just complaining, which is important, because if you don't complain, you will never be heard. Um, they're not only complaining, but they're writing about it and writing how things ought to change. And I think they are making waves in art. So I know a bunch of people who read this, so they're doing an amazing job. So this is video game histories. This is a project I've done. That's been spammed with attacks, unfortunately, and I need a fix. But this is basically a lot of individual art histories in a Google slideshow where I ask people to contribute something to this. What's important in your history of video games that might get overlooked in like bigger publications? Like I've never heard of Let's Go Thingio. Like this person, Durjo, says Let's Go Thingio is a stupid game, honestly. And it's an inside joke that I was never into, right? So obviously this is not a legal thing, it's riffing off Nintendo stuff, but it's this person found this important to them, that most people probably haven't heard of. So this is me sort of making a little attempt to do some art video game history stuff, which is a lot of fun. I'm not expecting it to go anywhere. It's just let's have some fun and talk about some important things to us. This is a too long didn't read of this lecture, so if you only have like 15 minutes and you can't watch all of this lecture, watch this. All right, art versus artist. This is the second part of the lecture. All right. So artists do not exist in the vacuum, but sometimes they suck. So this is also a too long didn't read of this lecture. It's pretty much what this lecture is wrapped up in a nutshell. I will say that I'm gonna spend a lot of time on like certain slides. So yeah, it's not gonna be the most visually interesting thing. All right, so this is an article, What Do We Do with the Art of Monstrous Men? It's extremely optional because if you don't know about Woody Allen, he married his ex-partner's adopted child, who was, I think, 17 at the time. Um, well, he waited till they were legal to marry, but he was, you know, with her. I'm not going to go into more detail with that. So yeah, Woody Allen's a scumbag for sure. And so this article talks about how, um, let's go to the next slide. These are questions and reflections from the article, and you don't need the article to understand these questions. So again, so if you don't know who Woody Allen is, he made a lot of very well-received movies, such as Manhattan, Annie Hall. Can't think of anything else at the moment. But yeah, so after knowing what he did with this underage girl and the fact that she is his ex partner's adopted daughter, that's creepy as hell, right? So he made this movie Manhattan about his relationship with an underage girl. This is before everything surfaced. But that thing is just gross to begin with. Anyway, so can you watch a movie, for example, knowing that the director is a monster and did these like gross things, right? How does that change your reading of it? Is it still as good? Can you ignore it because it's so interconnected with real life? Like how does that change things for you? I purposely watched that movie afterwards, and I didn't feel anything, which felt weird, but I realized, oh yeah, it's because he's portraying it as this normal thing. I was always like, well, why would any man date an underage girl? That's disgusting. Like, I just sort of like had an out of body experience where I was just like, this is stupid, whatever, you know. And think about it, like watching things supports the artist. So even if you don't pay for things, if it's a YouTube video, they're getting a view from that, right? And if you talk about and discuss it with your friends, you're effectively advertising it, even if you say if it's awful, if it's gross. Basically, that make when someone says like, "Oh, this disgusting thing," you kind of want to see what it is for yourself, right? And so, in a way, talking about it like I am now is sort of a form of advertisement, right? Even if you don't endorse it. So, um, but also remember, it's not good to hold things in. So, if you're disgusted by Woody Allen, as hopefully everyone should be, um, then yeah, it's probably a good idea to talk about it. But in a way, you might be advertising it in that sense. So if someone's a quote unquote genius, do they get a pass because they're brilliant and do amazing things? Um, the whole thing about a genius, we'll talk about a little bit later. Is it fair to cancel these monsters? What about these works? What should be the consequences to them? Right. So, I mean, sexual misconduct is a huge thing in Hollywood. Um, the Me Too movement was very important. It's really good because, it before then men could get away with really bad things and basically like ruin women. And again, I think women are humans and should be treated as humans just like men are. Same with non-binary people, of course. um, and so I think there should be consequences when someone does something bad, in my opinion. Again, that shouldn't be controversial. So um But what does canceling mean? Who actually gets canceled? Like J.K. Rowling complains about getting canceled, but she still has these platforms to spew her disgusting transphobia. Um, she's not canceled. She's just playing victim, right? So what does canceling mean? I don't know. Like when people are put away in jail, I guess, for crimes they committed that they deserve to be punished for. Incarceration is a whole other topic I don't want to get into for many reasons. But yeah, there should be consequences like being blacklisted, maybe, or maybe having clauses like you can't do this with these actresses, or actors saying like I won't work with these directors because they've had uh, a pattern of abuse towards women like me, things like that. Those could be consequences, for example. But canceling, that doesn't really mean anything most of the time. It's nuanced, but yeah. Can you be a good person and a monster? I would say yeah. You can do good things. Um, I would say cops are a great example because cops can be like the most, when they're off duty, they can be amazing parents, amazing community members. Never mind the fact that 40% do spousal domestic abuse. Um, but when they're actual cops, sometimes, they shoot people that shouldn't be shot. They arrest people that shouldn't be arrested. Um, Bad things happen. Of course, good things. Cops prevent bad things from happening as well. There's a lot of nuance to that, but as we saw in 2020, there's a lot of bad shit that cops did, right? That are objectively really bad. So, but when they take off their uniform, they can be a different person. Maybe, I don't know. Again, there's a lot of nuance there. As a brown person, you probably know where I stand because I've had an involuntarily bad relationship with plenty of police just by doing nothing, literally. Um, well, reading, for example, but anyways, that's a whole nother story. But yeah, people aren't just one singular thing. So, yeah, Woody Allen is could be a great philanthropist and like save many people's lives. And he could also have been with underage women, you know. So that complicates things. Um, and yeah, let's skip over the last 2 points, not that important. So Hannah Gadsby Nanette was a Netflix special that was really good, regardless of as far as like how she addresses Picasso and Van Gogh, regardless of the rest of her set, which was amazing, by the way, in my opinion. So I highly recommend watching the whole special. It's really, really intense. There's a lot of bad words, talk about sexual abuse and trauma. But if you can handle that, it's really, really powerful and amazing. But the parts I want to address are how she talks about Picasso and Van Gogh. Again, the site is paywalled, but it's a very good dive into what she talks about in regards to these people. So, yeah, so some of the stuff she talks about with Picasso is how, like, he had a quote where, like, when I'm done with a woman, she should be burned, stuff like that. When he was like in his 40s, he married a 14-year-old, like really gross stuff. And the way he depicts women sometimes is obviously like disgusting. Not everything is like that though. But yeah, he was very misogynistic person who looked down upon women, which again is horrible. Um, so yeah, it's really good in how she addresses that. And we'll talk about Van Gogh a little bit later. Actually, it's they're kind of within these videos. So I'm not gonna play all these videos. I'm just gonna play them in mute in the background while I talk about them. So I don't think I have summaries, do I? No. So these are things that you should watch on your own. Um, not they're not only amazing, but there's might be something on the quiz about them. Who knows? Um, so yeah, so this is, oh, sorry, I should have done the truth, the myth of the torture artist. So both these are the art assignment, which I show a lot of videos of. Um, oh, this is a clip from the net. So basically, a torture artist is a weird myth, right? So what this means is that the best artists, the genius artists, they're great because they suffered, because they're crazy. They're these wacky people that normal people couldn't have this type of brilliance, right? And so that's sort of a myth that perpetuates that the crazier they are, the more brilliant they are. Which, as you can probably tell by the way I'm talking about, isn't the case. Um, so let's see. Yeah, so this is Edgar Allan Poe talking about how he had some periods of where he was very, very productive, and times where he wasn't, when he was depressed, right? Where is it? So this is one of my favorite slides is take out the caption so you can see these. So this is where this composer had different bouts of depression and hypomania. So you can see that when he was diagnosed retroactively, I guess, as bipolar, or not diagnosed, but sort of fit into that sort of pattern, where this is where he made a lot of these compositions here in 1940, for example, or sorry, 1840, wrong century. He had the most energy and he was able to make stuff. But when he had severe depression, he couldn't make anything. When and so like it started to climb up, and he was very productive when during this period. When he had a suicide attempt, well, he didn't really make anything. When he died out of self-starvation, well, he couldn't really make anything. He wasn't weak, he wasn't able to. So this talks a lot about how this video talks a lot about how Well, artists aren't creative because they're crazy. And there's this Jeff Tweedy of Wilco. In this clip, he talks about how he has depression, and basically depression isn't what makes him an interesting person. Depression and make him a genius, because a lot of Wilco's music is very, very highly regarded as great music. Um, but yeah, so he says, I didn't make I don't make good music because of my depression. I make it in spite of his depression, because, well, when you're depressed, you can't really make good stuff. I can speak from personal experience. I have dysthymia, which is a underlying depression, which means I'm kind of depressed all the time, brain chemical imbalance or whatever. Not necessarily sad, but I just feel kind of like blah. Um, and that means a lot of times I just don't have the energy to make art. Um, and I think many people can relate to this aspect too, is like, I'm most productive when there's a deadline coming up, because that anxiety drives me out of that depression and makes me quote unquote more normal and more able to function. Because when I'm depressed, like, I just don't feel like doing anything. I'll just watch YouTube videos or play like a mindless video game, like Trackmania or racing, where I don't have to think too much, or just nap. So so a lot of artists who are genius, again, make great stuff despite the obstacles they have to overcome. There's not really a correlation when it comes to mental illness um, and genius. So another fun point that she brings up is, like, there's a lot of different jobs that are creative and um, don't necessarily have, like this guy who I'm totally in love with, like. So yeah, not everyone, like, there's different professions, not just art, that have people who deal with depression, and that can affect their work. Like, this guy is obviously pretty happy, and in a good mood. Maybe when, like, his dog dies, like, he might not be that same bouncy person, or he might be that bouncy person just trying to get through the day, by using that to distract himself from his dog being dead. There's a follow-up video uh, called The Truth of the Tortured Artist, which dives a little bit more into this. Um, and this is a good example, this image of, like, making art is hard, right? It's not just about being tortured. Sometimes, like, art or great art can happen in spite of, like, just normal everyday problems that don't have to do with mental illness or whatever. Um, and this is a screenshot of, like, success, you know. So not everyone has to be tortured, and some examples are like this, where this took, you can see, 4 years to make all this, right? A long time to make a piece of art. Granted, it's one of the most well-known, loved pieces of art of all time. This took a really long time too, right? But then we have an image of Andy Warhol where, like, these tomato soup cans were probably made within like 5 minutes. And not everything has to be hard to make in order to be good, right? Um, so yeah, like, these didn't take very long at all. Um, I think the video says, like, probably a day that this was made. Or so, even though circa, yeah. So some things are made quick, some things are made fun. And in my case, I only really like to make art when it's fun. I don't like to labor into it. When it does get kind of difficult, I shift my mindset to, okay, how do I solve this problem most efficiently? And making it easiest for myself. So, and then I have other friends who do have to suffer for their art, who, like, toil for hours and hours to make something like 4 by 4 inches, right? So it depends on the artist, who they are, um, what they're trying to accomplish, you know. And there's this fantastic quote where someone's asking Whistler, like, oh, how come you're charging 200 guineas for this thing that only took 2 days? And then he says, well, it took a lifetime. So basically, like, even though something took a very short amount of time, oh, where is that? Yeah, even though something took a very short amount of time, it doesn't mean it only took like 5 minutes to make it. There's an accumulation of knowledge throughout their lifetime. So yeah, like a lot of Picasso stuff for to bring someone up that's relevant. Um, uh, or like this, for example, let's go to Matisse. Like this is very simple. It's just a few lines. Probably took less than a few minutes to make. Like, but it's beautiful. Like there's so little lines that go into it. Yeah, it's not perfect right here, but like the rest of it, uh, try doing this yourself is what I'm trying to say with like, and make it look accurate and good. Um, it took a lot of work to get to this point to make things look simple. Same thing with professional athletes. Like if they're athlete that makes something look simple, it's because they put a lot of time and effort into it. It's not just because they're genius and they were born with talent. Everything takes a lot of work when it comes to art, for sure. Like my silly little paintings, I had to learn how to paint in a way to be able to do that. Granted, I've only like done like maybe, I don't know, 50 paintings in my life, compared to most painters I know, which is in the hundreds. But like it still took effort to do that, to make this silly painting, you know. Um, and then this section talks about how, yeah, sometimes like artists do go through pain and suffering, and using art is a good way to express this. It's a good way to self therapy, more or less, right? Like Frida Kahlo, she was in a vehicle crash, and so she did a lot of pain describing her pain of her spine, as you can see, um, and what it was like to live like that, you know. Um, so these are things about pain and stuff like that, and trauma. Um, yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah. So like not all great art is made because someone's a genius. Um, Everyone's a human. They have their struggles to deal with. They have their ups and downs. Sometimes the downs help people. Sometimes it inhibits progress, like it does for me. You know, um, that's why sometimes I have a hard time grading, is because like I don't have any good feedback in my mind that I can formulate. Right. So yeah, remember that artists are humans and deserve to be treated as such. They're not mythical figures. And the whole idea of a genius, in my opinion, is harmful because again, that dehumanizes them. And sure, it makes them into someone who's like above everyone else. But it also takes away the fact that they are flawed people. They had to work hard in order to make these artworks. It's not just like perfect. Yeah, Picasso was brilliant at painting at age 14. Um, but he had to work in order to get to that. He just happened to be more in tune with himself. Like, how many talents might you have if you discovered them? Like, some of you might be really, really good at juggling chainsaws, but you were too scared to try or never had the opportunity. What about weird niche jobs like repairing airplanes that you wouldn't think of because it's not thought of as important as being a doctor or whatever? So there's a lot of circumstances that lead to um, talent not being discovered. But remember, it's not talent, it's hard work, it's discovering it, it's being there, it's yeah, working with it a lot. So you might be naturally predisposed to things. Like I'm naturally predisposed to art. I couldn't do biology. My brain's not programmed that way, so I ended up back in art because that's what made the most sense to me, right? I wouldn't say I'm good at art. I work hard at it, and I'm extremely passionate about it, which is where I am, which is why this is where I am today teaching art, is because like couldn't make biology work. I also couldn't make my minor of human communication work either. So I ended up falling back to, well, art is my passion, even though I know it's going to be hard to make it in art. I'm just going to put all my energy into it, and I'm making it work. So yeah, I'm here as a result of very, very, very hard work. So this is a funny article where have all the artist addicts gone? So it's, and then the quote tweet says a lot of them died from substance abuse. So this article is actually pretty good because it does address that. But for people who only read the headline, and this, I forgot what this is called. I just learned what it was last week. For people who only read that, this is pretty much a good answer for that. But yeah, this article actually is good and goes into that. So Art 21, this is a really, really cool channel that has, as you can see, like pretty short documentaries, 15-ish, 10 to 15-ish minutes, about different contemporary artists in the 21st century, hence Art 21. It goes into not just their artwork, but their personalities. Usually talks about what they're currently doing with a little dive into the past. But this really shows you who these people are and who they can be. And that can help determine how you feel about them. But yeah, I highly recommend just clicking on something random and learning something new about an artist you've never heard of. This is Ai Weiwei's Never Sorry documentary from 2012. Whew. I'm obviously not going to show it because it's about 2 hours, but it's so, so, so good. I've seen it 10 times. I usually show it to the class when I teach it 2 days a week, but we don't have time. Never gotten tired of it once. It's just so, 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 so good. All right, so that's the slideshow. Of course, this is these are topics that we can talk about forever and ever and ever. But I want you to watch these videos that have the green hearts on them. I recommend watching and reading everything that I've listed. I will say the things with green hearts probably do have quiz questions on them. So yeah, thanks for watching. Again, let me know if you enjoyed it, if you watched at all, and I'm gonna stop sharing. And yeah, have a good week. Toodles.